Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Research Rundown. My name is Kayla Scott, and I'm a reference archivist with the Alabama Department of Archives and History. Today's presentation will provide an overview of Confederate pension records with details of what a pension record is, where and how to search for them, and what information you can hope to find. Next time on April 19th, we will discuss Civil War service records, so be sure to tune in. Following the Civil War, most areas of the South were poverty-stricken. Soldiers who had been maimed or disabled in the war faced particular challenges in continuing to provide for their families and themselves. States of the former Confederacy were each responsible for the help they offered the soldiers of their state. This is why the pension system was created by an act of Alabama state legislature. There were several acts of the state legislature that built the basis for the Confederate pension system in Alabama. As early as 1864, an act making an appropriation to aid indigent families of soldiers in the military service from the state of Alabama was put into place. The text can be found in Act 2 of the 1864 session. A later piece of legislation further addressed veteran needs. An act for the relief of maimed officers and soldiers who belonged to military organizations of the state or the Confederate States was passed during the 1866-1867 session. An act for the relief of maimed soldiers was passed in the 1875-76 session. The text can be found in Act 149, House Bill 476 of that session. An act to make an additional appropriation for the purpose of carrying into effect an act for the relief of maimed soldiers was approved March 6, 1876. This was passed during the 1876-1877 session. Another act for the relief of maimed soldiers was passed in the 1878-1879 legislative session. These last two acts seem to be cited the most in pension applications and paperwork that I have searched through. The acts seem to have had the most influence on the pension process, despite there being a very long list, as you can see, that contribute to or edit the pension process. An act for the relief of needy Confederate soldiers and sailors, residents of Alabama, who from wounds or other cause are now unable to earn a livelihood, and for the widows of such as were killed or died in said war and have not since remarried. These are just some of the acts that provide a basis for the much larger and more comprehensive act that was passed during the 1898-99 legislative session. An act for the relief of needy Confederate soldiers and sailors, resident citizens of Alabama, and their widows was a 9-page act that spelled out details for eligibility, administration, and organization of a pension system for the Confederate soldiers and their widows. To give you a brief idea of the contents of this act, here is a portion of Section 1. Be it enacted by the General Assembly of Alabama that any resident citizen of this state on the first day of January 1899 and who is a resident citizen at the time of filing his application, who, while in the military or naval service of this state or the Confederate States, lost a leg or an arm, or the use thereof, or who from wounds received while in such service, or who from sickness or old age, or who is blind or deranged, and unable at the time to make a living by physical labor, by reason of his permanent disability, and who did not desert the service of the Confederate States or the state of Alabama, and who does not own property to the value of $400, this is very important, and who has no children living with him upon whom he can depend for support, and whose salary or income does not exceed $300 per annum, shall be entitled to the provisions of this act, as hereinafter provided, and the widow of any soldier or sailor of this state or of the Confederate States who has not married since the death of such soldier or sailor, and whose husband did not desert the service of the state or of the Confederate States, and who was a resident citizen of the state on the first day of January 1899, and who is a resident citizen of the state at the time of filing her application, and who does not own property to the value of $400, shall also be entitled to relief under the provision of this act, as hereinafter provided. This gives you an idea of how detailed this act was. In doing detailed pension research, having a copy of this act can prove useful in answering many questions and understanding the when, where, and why of your ancestors' application and eligibility. So, where should you look for Alabama pension applications? One helpful Ancestry.com collection is the Alabama U.S. Confederate Pension and Service Records, 1862 to 1947. During the 35 years after the Civil War until 1900, only disabled soldiers were receiving a pension from the state of Alabama for their service. In 1899, the state legislature authorized pensions for Confederate veterans who were not disabled and resided in Alabama. Pensions could also be awarded for their widows. The warrants for these payments were drawn up by the state auditor and include name, number, occupation, where wounded, date of wound, whether a widow or veteran, company, regiment, and branch of service. A second and typically more useful collection that contains a wider number of records is the Ancestry.com collection, Alabama, Texas, and Virginia U.S. Confederate Pensions, 1884 to 1958. Pension records for the soldiers or their widows who served from the states during the Civil War are contained in this collection. Searchable by first and last name of the soldier or widow, images of the records themselves are provided. This collection does not provide a complete index of all pensioners, as the records are compiled from different states at different times and by different offices after the Civil War. Also, not all soldiers who fought for the Confederacy are registered. However, some information on missing files or rejected applications can be found in this collection. Besides names, residence, and dates, a pension file can yield information about the life circumstances of the veteran. Details can include how long they resided in the state where the pension was collected, where they were born, their address and occupation, what command they served under, length of time served, and the name of the company. Pension applications were typically submitted to the state where the veteran was residing, as opposed to the state where they enlisted and served, which can be different if they moved to a different state following the war. Documents can include applications, correspondence, affidavits, widow applications for reclassification, and other related materials. Confederate soldiers requested a pension from the state where they lived at the time of application and not necessarily the state they enlisted and served under. For instance, you will see soldiers who served in Georgia in the counties in eastern Alabama. Generally, an applicant was eligible for a pension only if he was elderly, indigent, which is extremely poor, and or disabled. Each state had their own guidelines and pension review process. Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, North Carolina, South Carolina, Oklahoma, Texas, Tennessee, and Virginia have Confederate pension record collections. As with the other states granting Confederate pensions, Alabama's records are state government records and should be sought at the state archives, not the federal repository. One term you will notice in pension records is class. To explain that, we can turn to Act 421 of the 1898-99 term, which is the main act for establishing the pension system, as I mentioned earlier. Section 12, Act 421. Be it further enacted that the beneficiaries of this act shall be divided in 4 classes as follows: soldiers or sailors who are totally blind or who have lost 2 limbs, or the entire use thereof shall be class number 1. Those who have lost a leg above the knee or an arm above the elbow shall be class number 2. Those who have lost a foot or hand or the entire use thereof shall be class number 3, and all others, including the widows, shall be class number 4. Each class shall participate in the division of the pension fund in the proportion hereinafter provided. Class 1, soldiers and sailors who are blind, have lost 2 limbs or entire use of 2 limbs. Class 2, loss of a leg above the knee or arm above the elbow. Class 3, loss of a foot or hand or entire use of either. Class 4, all others including widows. Section 16, to the first class 60 cents, to the second class 50 cents, to the third class 40 cents, and to the fourth class 30 cents. Provided that in no 1 year shall the first class receive over $60, the second class over 50, the third class over 40, nor the fourth class over 30. Any amount remaining in the fund after each class shall be by the auditor certified into the general fund of the state. Now that we have discussed what a pension is and where to find one, let's look at some images of pension records for examples of what we can learn from them. On the right here, you have a typical cover page for the pension application that has the soldier's county of residence, DeKalb, his name, B.S. Smith, and his pension number, 2690. Beside this information, you see a notation of approved, dated June 21st, 1895, and signed by the judge of probate. The approved details can sometimes be found on the final page of the pension file instead of the first. In the outset to the left, I have zoomed in on details that explain eligibility for this application. Under Act approved February 13, 1891, for the relief of needy Confederate soldiers and sailors, residents of Alabama, who from wounds or other cause are now unable to earn a livelihood, and for the widows of such as were killed or died in said war and not since remarried. On the next page, we have a typical pension application form. At the top, in tiny print, are the words, "For the relief of needy Confederate soldiers and sailors, residents of Alabama, who from wounds or other cause are now unable to earn a livelihood by labor, under Act approved February 13, 1891, and amended February 1895. We have the county of residence, the name of the probate judge, the name of the applicant, B.S. Smith, his rank, private, his company, D, and his regiment, 28th Georgia Cavalry. Remember, applicants apply to their state of residence, not the state they served with. The application further states he is now afflicted with lung trouble and epilepsy, and in consequence of such sickness, he is physically unable to earn a livelihood by labor. The application also stipulates that he is now a bona fide resident of Alabama and that he's been such for at least 1 year prior to this date. The application also has a line for his post office address, a line for his business information, and a line for describing his taxable property that has been left blank, probably due to lack of property. To be eligible, the following had to be true regarding his taxable property. It couldn't be worth in the aggregate more than $500, that his salary or gross income does not amount to $500 per year, and that his wife does not own a separate estate of more than $500. This application was approved by the Board of Examiners and by the Judge of Probate for DeKalb County on July 6, 1898. Sometimes the soldier applied more than once for a pension. This could be due to initial denial of his claim, a change in class, a move to a different county, or other issues that arose. This is basically the same application form with a few different or additional details provided. For his health issues and eligibility, it says he has lung trouble and is quite old. It provides the same post office address, then adds new information that he is engaged in the business of farming and that his taxable property consists, as I surmised earlier, of nothing. In addition to the same information from earlier files, we see that in 1862, he was stationed at Camp Harrelson in Georgia, and the application further states that while there he contracted epilepsy and afterward an abscess of the lung. Yet another application from Mr. Smith adds a few new details and states that he was a private in Company D of 28th Regiment, with the additional detail of naming Colonel Claiborne's regiment. It also adds that he was on duty in the states of Georgia and Virginia when he contracted epilepsy and asthma, and notes he was also afflicted with fistula and rheumatism. Next, we have a physician's certificate of examination that declares him unable to labor and gives further details of his ailments. On the right, we have a slightly different application form that gives us a few new details, including that he is 62 years of age at the time of this application in May 1902. Here, we have an inventory form that provides a look at his financial state and lists items that he owned. The application notes that he doesn't own land, he doesn't own any horses, mules, cattle, hogs, sheep, or goats. He doesn't own any guns. He does own one clock valued at $3. His household and kitchen furniture is valued at $40. He doesn't have a bicycle or vehicle, nor mechanical farming tools or implements. And his total property is valued at $43. Now we move to widow's pension records. In addition to looking at the pension collections on Ancestry and Fold3 that I mentioned previously, a few widow's pension records are available in our digital collections at archives.alabama.gov. You will note that these applications are extremely similar in format to those of the soldiers' applications. At the top of the application, the following description can be found. Under Act for the Relief of Needy Confederate Soldiers and Sailors, residents of Alabama who from wounds or other cause are unable to earn a livelihood, and for the widows of such as were killed or died in said war and have not since remarried, under Act approved February 18th, 1891, and as amended February 18th, 1895. The image on the left here gives you the veteran's name, B.M. Smith, as well as the applicant's name, his widow, Annie Smith. She is a resident of Lee County, Alabama. We also see that he served in Company K of the 1st Georgia Regiment. The sheet to the right tells us she was approved for Class 4 in the pension system as widows were classified. Written in ink in the image on the left, we see the County of Lee noted at the top. Mrs. Annie Smith noted as the petitioner, confirmation that she is resident of Lee County, then a note that she is the widow of B.M. Smith, who served as a private in Company K of the 1st Regiment Georgia Regular Volunteers. The next sentence provides his death date as being the 4th day of July 1901, which is great information for our research. The next page on the right here shows that she swore that the information on the previous page was correct. At the bottom of the page, we have an affidavit for witness to application of widows. This person is putting their stamp of approval on her statements and would have to be acquainted with her and her husband to be able to do so. Sometimes these affidavits are from neighbors. Sometimes they are from fellow veterans who served in the same regiment with the soldier applying, or the widow's husband. Similar affidavits can be found in both soldiers' and widows' applications and provide potential for an additional research lead. It's worth filing witness names away for further research. Widows' pensions typically included an inventory form, just as most soldier applications do. Her application notes that she doesn't own land, She doesn't own any horses, mules, cattle, hogs, sheep, or goats. She doesn't own any guns. She does own one clock valued at $5. Her household and kitchen furniture is valued at $25. She doesn't have a bicycle or vehicle, nor mechanical farming tools or implements. Her total property is valued at $30. Here are a few tips to keep in mind while searching for Confederate veteran pension records. If you don't find the records you are looking for with an Ancestry.com search, be sure you have checked both of their databases that include Alabama pensions. Also search Fold 3. Remember to search for alternate spellings of names. For example, John B. Haynes, Jonathan B. Haynes, Hanes, J. Haynes, J.B. Haynes, Jhaines, or Jhaynes, etc. Also search for the widow's name as well as the soldier. Remember the restrictions on eligibility. Things that could disqualify applicants include but are not limited to the soldier owning property of value, failing to prove poor health, or the widow remarrying. Restrictions such as these mean a pension would not have been given. Here are a list of resources that I have mentioned in this presentation, as well as additional resources that would prove helpful in pension research. You should have these links in the comments section of the presentation by the time we end today. There is a Family Search Wiki for Confederate pension records that helps provide some direction for where to look for each state. The page includes Alabama and other states as well. For Ancestry.com collections, we have the previously mentioned Ancestry Collection Alabama, Texas, and Virginia pensions, and the Ancestry Collection Alabama, U.S. Confederate pension and service records. While not as easily searchable and featuring lower quality scans, it is worth checking FamilySearch.org's pension collections as well. If you want further information about pensions for each state, you can also check the National Archives Pension Records info page. And for Alabama, the text of the 1898 Act regarding Confederate pensions in Alabama helps provide a better understanding of the process and guidelines that pensioners faced. There are many acts that deal with the pension and amendments to qualifications and practices, but this appeared to be the most comprehensive and influential of the acts. And of course, if you don't have time to search for pension records yourself, feel free to submit a research request form and we will do it for you. Visit our website and fill out a research request form. One of our reference archivists will go through files in all of our collections, such as Fold3 and Ancestry.com, and will give you a full look at your ancestor service. You never know what you will find. Depending on how long your ancestor served and if all of the records survived the war, there can be many or a few documents. This wraps up today's research rundown. Thank you again for joining us. We have a survey link in the comments and would appreciate your feedback. It only takes a couple of minutes to complete and helps us to understand what works best in these presentations. Don't forget to join us in 2 weeks on April 19th for the final research rundown in our spring session, which will cover Civil War service records in Alabama. We should have some time for a few questions before we go, but if you think of any questions after the presentation, feel free to email me at kayla.scott@archives.alabama.gov. So I'm going to click over to, let's see here, and see what questions we have on Facebook and also on YouTube. So bear with me a moment, please. Okay. Do applications contain evidence of poor health beyond the affidavit by a neighbor or fellow veteran? Okay, so there was the certificate that I mentioned during the presentation. These aren't always available, but um, they do sometimes give evidence of health issues by spelling out. Basically, it's like, if you apply for disability today, it would be the same principle as going to the doctor and getting that kind of affidavit. So sometimes you'll basically have a certificate of health, and then you would also have the person themselves stating as they fill out the application um, issues that they may have with their health as well. Is there an online site to look for documents for a person who died during the Civil War? I can't find anything on my second great grandfather except one site which mentioned he died after 3 months. So this is a comment from Maureen Kennedy. Thank you. Um, there isn't a website per se, but one thing you can do is check the National Park Service. They have a database of all the names of people that served, or as many as they could find. And you can see if there's any notation with that. You can also check on our website. We have a Confederate Civil War Service database, and sometimes there will be a mention in the index card that's on there of why um, someone passed away or if they passed away. You can also submit a research request. We have a very limited number of Civil War soldiers' death files, which those are basically when someone passed away and then the next of kin applied for any back pay that they had. So you could check with us on that. Otherwise, if you get a subscription to Fold 3, sometimes but not always, but sometimes the service records, which we'll talk about in 2 weeks, those will mention a soldier's death as well. Okay. Could veterans serving in reserves, aka Home Guard, receive pensions? Okay, that's a question from Richard Jesse. Thank you, sir. That one is something I'm still working on. So you would feel free to email me for further details on that. All of the research that I've ever done, and my supervisor as well, neither of us have ever come across Home Guard in the pension applications. There were specifically some of the acts that said that Home Guard soldiers weren't eligible. They were not eligible, but I believe some of the later ones may contradict that. So it kind of will just depend, I think, on a case by case basis, possibly. But I have never seen a Home Guard application in research that I have done. Okay. See, I don't see any more questions. Okay. Click over to YouTube. Where can I find records for the Home Guard if they did not qualify for a pension? Okay, so some of Home Guard files, we do have like some paper copies of those. I'm not sure if they're on microfilm as well. Of course, we're closed to the public right now. But once we reopen, you would be welcome to come in and chat with us. And of course, if you'd like further details, you can send me an email. But I know that we have like some limited information about Home Guard regiments in our files, but it is once again very limited because of what survived. Okay. With the pension records on microfilm, is there an online index so we could see if our ancestor has a pension record? Okay, so they're actually on ancestry.com. So that's where most pension records are, is on ancestry.com, as I mentioned. So there is a way that you can just type in the name and look and see. You can find everyone by that name, and of course, remember what I said, to look for variations of the name. But there's not like just a list that you can pull up online and see that your ancestor is on there, but it is really easy to get on ancestry.com and do a search in those collections that I mentioned. Do veterans living in other states receive Alabama pensions? Okay, so as I was doing the research, what I found was that consistently, if you were an Alabama pensioner and you lived in Alabama, then you received an Alabama state pension. If you were from Georgia and you had just moved over the state line, or maybe you were from South Carolina and you had moved to Alabama as well, then you received an Alabama pension. But if you were an Alabama resident, had moved to Georgia, then you would have been part of the Georgia pension system. So whatever state that your ancestor was living at the time that he put in the application is where you should look for their records. Okay. Is there a way to get a copy of the document returning soldiers had to sign in order to vote? Now, I'm not exactly certain where those are, but the voter registers, the voter registration books are digitized on our website. So if you go to archives.alabama.gov, then you will find the voter registration books. And I believe those are searchable by typing in last name as well. Okay. Is that basically all of our questions today, I think? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in and for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. And once again, if you have any questions about the content or any of the records that we've discussed today, please feel free to email me at kayla.scott@archives.alabama.gov. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you April 19th for our next session.